now so we can get right into our topic of the day, which is starting strategies. So, again, in the lines of things we've talked about before, but now we get to sit and talk about them for 40 minutes instead of 10. We're using a couple different, pulled some ideas from a couple different books today. We've seen Dave Perry, Winning in One Designs, before, but he's got some good chapters in there about some starting strategies. And then Steve Colgate, I don't know who he is, wrote a book called Performance Sailing and Racing. This one it's a smaller book. It seems to be more about, if you already know how to sail, but you don't know much about racing, that's like a good primer. And then obviously the Dave Perry book is just real in depth and a lot of stuff. But anyway, so we've got some ideas out of both of those, and then some of my own, and we'll have a good talk. So anyway, starting, we have, you know what, I should grab out more buoys so I don't have to keep writing little orange marker dots and then erasing them and then realizing 30 seconds later that I didn't want to erase them yet. We'll just have our buoys here. So obviously, when we're setting up to start a race, we want to put ourselves in the best position possible, because a sailboat race starts, instead of like a foot race where everybody's even. I actually don't have an example in my head of an analogy for a sailboat race, because depending on what you do for the start, you may put yourself in a better position completely legally than lots of other people. Or conversely, you could also put yourself in a much worse position than lots of other people. So we want to work out how to get the best start we can. So one of the first things, which kind of goes back to some of the stuff we talked about yesterday, is you want to kind of set yourself up so that you can get onto the favored tack of the race course pretty almost immediately. And so if you remember, we said the favored tack is the one that lets us point closer to that windward mark, right? So if we happen to have the wind coming from an angle like this, then we can see that when we set up our boats to sail close hauled and close hauled on port and starboard, that this blue boat is going to be pointing a lot closer to the windward mark than the yellow boat, right? And so he's on port tack. That means our port tack is a favored tack. So if we were starting this particular race, we want to try to set ourselves up so that we can pretty quickly get onto that favored tack. Kind of a general rule of thumb that we have is if we have a situation where we've got a favored tack, or you can think of it as the long tack, right? Because that's what we're going to be sailing on for a longer period of time. If this is our port tack angle, then we can go all the way there to there, and then a little bit on starboard. Or if it was the other way around, if the wind was coming from the other angle, then we're going to sail along starboard tack and then a little bit on port, right? So we want to set ourselves up so that we can take that long tack first. Same thing if we're going downwind, we'd want to try to take the long tack on going downwind as well. Now the reason for that, because you can kind of sit here and think, why does it matter which one I do first, right? If I'm going to have to do a long starboard tack and then a short port tack, why does it matter if I do the starboard tack first? Why can't I just do the short port tack and then the long starboard tack? Seems like geometrically that shouldn't make a difference. But here's the thing. Another thing we talked about yesterday is kind of taking out that insurance policy, right? So if we know that everything can change all the time. This might be the long tack right now, but what if the wind shifts back or something like that? A lot of different things can happen, right? So instead of just thinking of it as we have this and then we have that, so I could do that and then this, I could do it out of order. Instead of thinking of it that way, we think that could change. This long tack could go away. What if it comes back and it's suddenly balanced again? So think of, if we do have two boats, we'll go back to our port tack favored course, right? So the yellow boat has decided he's going to do his short tack first. He's going to try to get to his port tack ley line and sail all the way up there. and this boat has decided he's going to take his long port tack first, and then he'll come back and take his short starboard tack. So if this all stays the same, then they probably will come out pretty even, right? But imagine we get halfway up, we each go a boat length. And so the yellow boat's about to tack, this guy's on a boat length here. Now the wind comes back to the middle. And so instead of these angles, now your tacks are more even. Now wherever you start from, you have to go the same amount on starboard as you do on port. Well, if we look at where these boats are, this guy got significantly further up the course. This guy got over to the side a little bit, but he's still way down. He's below, he's downwind of this guy. And it's because the blue boat was sailing on the longer tack. He was sailing on the one that took him closer to the mark. So even when the advantage went away, he already had this amount of sailing time that he'd been taking that advantage. Whereas this guy had been not taking the advantage. So he's actually lost by doing that. So geometrically, it doesn't matter whether you take the short tack or the long tack, but that's not the only thing we think of. The wind can change all the time. Other conditions can change all the time. So when we're setting up our start, we want to find how we can get onto that long tack and sail it first. Next up, we also kind of want to consider what side of the starting line might be favored. So just like having a favored tack, we can have the favored end of the starting line. That's going to be whichever end is further upwind, right? So let me make sure this is still in camera. Yes, my marks are still in camera. Perfect. So if one of these marks is further upwind, closer to the wind than the other mark, we would say that this end of the start line is favored. So in kind of this situation where we're not considering anything else, we're just looking at the marks, you would want to start up near this buoy, right? Because you'll have an advantage over somebody who starts at that buoy. You're both behind the line, but this guy is further ahead. So we're looking at that long tack. We're looking at which side of the line is favored. So sometimes they might be kind of opposing each other. Maybe this is the line, but this is the wind. And so we want to be able to get onto port tack right away. So, or something like this. We want to stay on starboard tack, but we want to be over here. Which one takes precedence? It's all going to depend on what amount of advantage each one gives you. But we want to find those and find, what's the favorite end of the line, what's the long tack, and use those in our figuring out what we want to do. Another thing is not only looking at which side of the line is favored, but also, remember we talked about yesterday, wind shifting, especially if it's shifting back and forth. We know that it's going this way some, and then in a few minutes it'll come back this way. So that long tack isn't going to stay the long tack the whole race. We want to kind of think about after the start. We want to, if we have enough of an idea of the patterns, which if we're a couple races into a long day of regatta, we probably are starting to get a good idea of the patterns of the wind shifts. So if we know roughly what it's going to be doing right after the start, we can set up for that. So like maybe the wind's right here, but we know that in 3 minutes when the start happens, the shift has gone back, and it'll be the starboard tack is the long tack. So then maybe we want to set up differently. We want to set up in a way that wouldn't make sense if we were just looking at this wind, but we know that this wind isn't going to stick around. It's going to be changed over here by the time that start happens. So when we're able to kind of think ahead that much, if we have that information, then we're able to act on that. So obviously that's something that we do need to have the prior information. So it's probably not something that we know about in the first race of the regatta, but once we've done 2 races and we realize, hey, this is going back and forth every so often, if we're able to actually have a minute, a time on it, then so much the better. But just having that idea of about the time it takes to sail upwind on that first beat is the difference in the shift. So getting that information is going to be able to help us in future races as we keep going. All right, so yeah, some information we can try to gather before we're even going into that race. But then as we're getting to towards our start, we've kind of picked where we want to be based on what factors we have. As we end up on the line, we want to make sure we're trying to keep a hole to leeward of us, right? And by a hole, we're saying open water. So if we're able to, we're sitting on this line and we know that right before the whistle goes off, we're going to accelerate our boat. Everybody's going to be doing it at the same time. And we do that by heading down a little bit so that we can get more speed. We're sailing fast, and then we're rounding right up, trimming our sails into close haul, crossing that line. So in order to do that, to be able to head down and drive, it means that there can't be a boat right here, right? So what we're trying to do is keep this bit of open water so that we've got room to head down and accelerate right before the gun. So when we are trying to defend that, we've got to be watching from kind of two areas, right? We're watching for boats that are trying to come in from behind and come right underneath. And we're also watching out for boats that might be coming from port tack and trying to tack into the spot. So we're making sure our eyes are all around. And since we have two people in the boat, that makes it a little easier since, we're trying to look two directions. We're not going to be just looking right here. We're looking all around it to know everything that's going on. But we have a crew that's probably sitting backwards in the boat. So they could be the one that's looking behind us and watching for those boats that are coming from behind. And then we've got the skipper who's facing this direction, right? So maybe they're the one that watches out for the port tack boats. Or maybe we decide that the skipper needs to focus on doing what he needs to do to stay there, and the crew is looking around to see both directions, because that's also certainly possible. So that again comes to another thing we've talked about before is kind of work out in your boat which jobs each particular person takes, and they might be different between different skipper and crew combinations. But we're making sure we're watching out for that so we can guard this little hole to leeward of us, make sure nobody's able to get in there, right? The other thing we want to kind of consider when we're in our spot on the line is that as we get into that final acceleration and rolling up off the line, we do want to make sure that we don't end up underneath somebody. And the first obvious reason is that if we're underneath somebody like this, we're in his bad air. We want clear air off the start line. If we're up here, we're fine because the wind that we're taking is coming basically off the front of the jib. It's all that we're right off the front of the boat, right? So the jib takes that air and then it feeds back to the mainsail. So the wind that's hitting the boat here isn't really what the mainsail is drawing off of. It's actually just taking this breeze right here, feeding it back to the whole boat. So you can be as far as here, the blue boat could be up to there and we're still in clear air. But once this guy moves forward like this, now we're starting to get in bad air. That's when we're going to start to drop back. So we want to make sure that we're not in this position or further back. And you might think as you're going through your start line that, I'm the leeward boat, so I can push him over the line, and then he's over the line, he's got to come back. And that's great. That's certainly within your rights, but just consider what's going to happen at that point. Now he is over the line and he's got to come back. And there's probably the easiest thing for him to do is he's going to be trying to head down like this, right? So whether or not that actually turns into a foul, since you are still the leeward boat, he's still trying to slow himself down and you're still in his bad air. So whatever he does to slow himself down is also starting to affect you. It's like team racing 101, how to slow the boat down that's behind you, right? He's doing all that not to hurt you specifically, just so that he can slow down and then be able to get back to that line. But if you're the one that pushed him over, then you're the one underneath him. So we want to try to avoid being directly underneath somebody. We want to work to leeward of them and get into our own little spot there. So that's something to think about. All right. So if we kind of think about what is a good start in terms of not necessarily finding the right position on the line, but after we found that right position, we'll kind of get back to, we'll come back to finding the right spot in a minute. But once, if we consider we're already in the right spot, we want to make sure that we stay in that front row of the start. So kind of consider, once we're in that right spot, what are the things that we can kind of check the box off and say, yeah, that was a really good start. And so basically it's, you're in the front row, you have clean air, you're toward the favored end of the line, and you're going the direction that you want to be going, right? So we want to make sure that we are in the front row, meaning we're not the yellow boat in this situation, we're the yellow boat in this situation. And so again, if we are in the front row, that means we probably have got that clean air. We've got the breeze coming right to us. It's not going through any other boat first. So front row clean air, we tried to find the spot we want to be in, right? We're toward the favored end, whichever that happens to be, whether it's just the favorite end of the line or it's the end we want to be at to get onto the favored tack, whatever the case might be. And we're going in the direction we want to be going for whatever reason. And it could turn out we were wrong, but it doesn't mean that it's the 100% right direction to go, but it's the one that we looked at all our information and chose this is where we want to go. So that's, if we can check all those boxes after the start, then we can say, yes, we did well on that start. So looking back to the Dave Perry book, his six, he's got his six starting rules. So his first rule, he says, don't get to the line too early. So if you start, this one's probably a little bit more relevant to the bigger boats that don't necessarily sit still on a line, but don't get to the point where you start making your run and realize that I went a little bit too soon, right? For the dinghies, we'll kind of break it down into that last, 20 seconds or so. So you don't want to start your acceleration too early, right? So we don't want to be sitting here on the line with everyone and then realize, I think it's, I'm ready to go. And then you start moving and then you realize, there's still 5 seconds left and I am about to cross the line and I can't do anything because I've moved toward this boat here. I've got no room. And so you end up crossing a little too early. So we want to make sure that we, in our practices, that we've figured out how we can time how long it takes to accelerate. So make sure we don't get to the line too early or start moving too early. We want to start as close to full speed as possible is rule number 2. So that's, again, with that accelerations, we want to make sure that not only are we up in that front row, but also that we get up to full speed. Right? It does us no good to be in this front row if we're moving slower than everybody else, and so they just sail away from us anyway. Then we may as well have started in the second row because that's where we end up. So we have to be able to get up to full speed or as close to it as everybody else, so that we're all moving the same speed. Next rule: start close to the windward boat and far away from the leeward boat. So what that means is we've got, all these boats are sitting on the line, and we kind of covered it just a minute ago, but we want that hole to leeward of us. We want that because when we start to do our acceleration, we need that room to head down and accelerate, right? So we want to have that space to leeward. So we don't want to be sitting right next to this boat that's down to leeward of us. And for the same reason, if we flip that idea on its head, we want to be up close to the windward boat. And this is kind of 2 reasons, right? One is that the closer to this guy we are, the more chance we have of having room this way. The further this direction we stay, the more space we're leaving ourselves here. You're almost trying to, every boat is going to be slowly sliding down the line. So our goal is to be sliding a little slower than this red boat is sliding, and we'll kind of open up space. The other reason to stay toward this guy, toward the windward boat, is that we are trying to block his hole to leeward, right? Remember, when in our acceleration kind of depends on being able to head down and do this acceleration. So if we are able to prevent this boat from doing that, he's not going to be able to accelerate as well as we are, which means he's going to end up a little more going a little slower. Forgot how to talk for a second. He's going to end up going a little slower than we are, which means that there's much less chance of him driving over top of us like this, right? If we were able to start immediately faster than him, he's going to end up back here instead of potentially getting up here where he starts to give us bad air. So leave yourself a hole to leeward, far away from the leeward boat, but close to the windward boat. Next up, Dave Perry's rule number 4. If you're trying to go underneath somebody, you know, or we're in that situation where we left it a little late, so we're a little lower on the line. We're trying to find our spot. We're going under people, and we're trying to find that open spot. Don't go underneath somebody unless we're 100% sure we can get out into a lane below them, right? So I explained that a little bit oddly, but basically what we're thinking is, it's, you know, we've got a few seconds to go. We're trying to get into this spot here. We don't want to go to get into that spot if, while we're doing this, everybody starts accelerating, he starts moving. Because if he starts accelerating, we're not going to be able to get out from under him, and we're going to start in his bad air. We're not going to be able to get all the way through into a clear lane. So if we realize we're in that situation, then we shouldn't go underneath. We should stay, and this leaves us one of two options. If there is a spot here, then we will come up and jump into this spot. And maybe we won't have a perfect start there, but we'll at least have a little open lane and a chance to get in and accelerate, right? The other option that's not quite as good, but maybe what's left to you, is that we'll stay behind everybody. Maybe we can poke up in here a little bit and not quite get in there. But instead of ducking underneath this guy and kind of getting halfway in there, is we'll stay behind, and that gives us the option to tack out immediately. We're not overlapped with anyone. We're not going to be stuck. So that's kind of a situation where we don't. It's not ideal, but if you get into it, that's the best way to deal with that, right? Don't get overlapped with somebody in where you can't actually tack in a position where you're starting immediately in bad air. Then rule number 5. So another in our kind of continuing the idea of we're not in the front row. This isn't a perfect start that is about to happen for whatever reason or not. If we're feeling a little more conservative, or we've not got into that front row, right? We're hanging back for some reason or another. We're only allowed to do that at the boat end of the line. So if we don't know that term, probably would have made sense if I had put this up. In most racing, but especially in high school sailing, we'll see it, is that we've got one mark and one boat, right? So we just call that the boat end. And this is the pin end of the line. But just for purposes here, since this is a little smaller on the board, gives me a little more room to move, I'll keep that going. Anyway, if we are hanging back, we're in the second row, we only do that here because we know that if we're in the second row, we are automatically in bad air. We don't want that. Or at any rate, we want it for as little time as possible because we can't fix it at this point, right? So if that's happening, we don't want to do it here because it's going to take us forever to get out. We need to be over on this side. That way, as everybody starts and they're on starboard tack, because everybody always starts on starboard, then we're able to come in and we're able to quickly tack out to the side and kind of get ourselves into a little bit of clean air. So it's not going to be a good start, but given that situation, it was already a bad start. We're just making it as not bad as possible, right? So if we find ourselves in the second row, we're going to if we can't get up in the first row, we're going to get to the boat end, the right side end or the weather end, whatever you call it. We're going to get as far that way as we can, as quickly as possible. Finally, last of his 6 rules for starting. If you are going for a leeward end start, or the pin end start, as we might call it, right? The only time we should intend to be the boat right at the pin is if we're 100% sure we can do that. If we think there's a chance that we might misjudge it and end up, maybe there's current coming down and we are at risk of sliding down into that pin and getting stuck, or hitting the pin and having to do a circle for a penalty, or if we're not sure that we can 100% get that, don't try to do that. It's fine to still be down toward the pin end, but don't try to be the boat at the pin unless you are definitely sure that you can do it. Because if you end up, oh, my 10-minute timer, if you end up missing it, then that's going to put you in usually a lot worse start than if you'd even been second row, right? So it's fine to go for that pin end start, but usually being a little more conservative and staying a little farther down the line and let these guys hang up on the pin is going to end up a little better for you. All right, let's see. What do we got next? Just to run through a couple of, we're working through kind of the standard start that we see, especially in high school sailing, right? Everybody's up on this line. We're all, we're all in a row. We're all trying to get that front row start. But there's different times and different conditions, different line sets that might make a few kind of stranger start strategies work out for us, right? So one of those would be a dip start, which that's going to be if we have the ability to be above the line before the start, aka there's no I flag going on, the 1 minute rule. Remember, the 1 minute rule is if you're upwind of the line within a minute to go until the start, you have to go all the way around the end to come underneath. You can't just dip under and then start again. So if we don't have that restriction, if it's just a normal race start, this would be something. Then we can come in and we're watching for a hole, and we're going to dip right down into it and then start. So this is something that we can do, especially if there's a lot of current that's going down the course. What if I have my current arrow? Look at that. Boom. So this is going to be the strongest if we have light wind and current that are coming down the course, right? So light wind meaning we're not moving very fast through the water, and current coming down the course meaning not only are we moving slowly through the water, but also the water itself is trying to push us down from the start line. So when that happens, we'll usually notice that all the boats are just a little low on the line, because it's harder to stay up right at that line. So the way we can take advantage of that is we're kind of sitting up here, and then with a little bit of time left to go, we're going to dive right down in here. And maybe if everybody's really low, we don't even have to get in the line. We can just be completely above everyone. But more likely is that, there's not going to be a whole boat length under there, but we can still find a nice hole, hop down in there, and we've kind of guaranteed that we're one of the people in that top row. So that's something you can think of. It is a more situational one. It is more dangerous because remember, we have the leeward boats have right of way, and we are the windward boat in that situation to everyone. So basically anybody on that line has right of way over us. If we misjudge it and they all actually do get to the line, then they'll just push us right over and we're kind of stuck. But in those certain situations, it can be pretty powerful. Another one would be what we call either the delayed start, or Dan's phrase for it, he likes to call it, is the parachute start, right? So that's going to be, we have our start line set up. We've got our committee boat there, and everybody's setting up here, and whatever situations are going on in the course, we really want to be able to get out to that left side, or that right side, sorry. We want to be able to get out to this side real quick. Or maybe the wind is such that somebody starting right at the boat here is going to have a huge lead over somebody who's starting at the pin. Maybe the boat end of the line is favored like that. And so there, we've definitely had starting lines before where the red boat that starts at the pin is going to be almost behind the yellow boat in this situation, right? We've got this guy starting right at the pin, this guy starting right at the boat. This boat starts behind the blue boat, and he's still ahead of the red boat. We've seen situations like that a couple times. So if you have something going on like that, then the way we can set up is we're kind of sitting here and we're waiting, and then as the start starts going, everybody's clearing out of here, everybody's moving out. And so you just come swooping down here, kind of reach in, and then go right around, and we can make our nice wide and tight rounding because everybody's already left. We're not fighting and trying to sit still and then do last acceleration. We're able to come in with some good speed, and then maybe we even just tack right off there. So the things that you kind of want to be careful of with this start is that if it's something that obvious that everybody can see, wow, the windward side, the boat end of the line is really good, you're probably going to have a lot of people that are trying to do this. And so it may just turn into a big log jam right here, and you might not actually be clear to do that. So just if that is your plan for a particular start, just make sure you're watching, and if it looks like everybody's trying to do that, then we want to either rethink it or just start making sure that we put ourselves in a position to win that fight. Which, anytime there's a pack of boats, it's going to be a little more risky than if you're on your own on the line. So just take that in consideration. Next thing we have is you might see what we'll call the port tack approach to the line, right? So remember when we were talking about holding our spot on the line and holding that leeward hole, we said there's two places boats might come to attack us. We might have people coming from the back, and we also might have people coming from port tack, right? So most of the time we see everybody kind of starting over here and then slowly working their way in, and everybody kind of gradually stacks up. But occasionally you'll see people coming in from the port side. So what you're looking for there is it kind of gives you a little more maneuverability, right? When we have everybody that's coming from the starboard side and sliding slowly along, once we kind of get into this formation, it's harder to change your mind. If you're the yellow boat and you've all been kind of sidling over for the last 30 seconds, you're all starting to squish in pretty tight. And if you kind of change your mind and realize this isn't exactly, the whole group is sidling to somewhere I don't really want to be, you don't have too many options for getting out. You're already stuck in your spot. The only ways to really get out is to sail up around or to somehow back yourself out, either one of which is going to take a lot of time and put you in a really not a great spot. So the port tack approach kind of lets you come along on port tack and be looking up and kind of watching for those holes that you can almost at the last second kind of tack into, as long as you can get in there before somebody defends against you. But that it gives you a little bit more options, right? And it is a little bit more risky in the sense that there might not be any holes. It might be that everybody has kind of sidled down and filled the line, and you can't find a spot to jump into. So it can give you more options, but it can also kind of shut your options as well. So while we're sitting there, we may as well kind of talk about how to defend against that, right? If you've got somebody who's trying to come in on port and steal your hole that you have carefully carved out to leeward, how do we defend that? So basically, we're sitting still. We've got our mainsail is pulled in so that it's not pushing us forward, but all the main sheet is not sitting there slack, right? If we just trim it a little bit, then our main is tight again. So if we pull that in, then we get a little bit of power over the sail, and it's a small enough period of time that it doesn't start making us go forward, but it does give us steerage through the water. So our rudder is able to turn the boat, or it's able to turn the boat pretty quickly when we do that, right? So we're going to pull that, we're going to keep that main in, we're going to turn down real sharp, and kind of, we're going to point so that it's obvious that we are aiming into this spot, and we're the starboard boat, he's the port boat, and he's about to tack. So there's no way that if there's a boat getting in here, there's no way this green guy is going to be able to hop in there, right? So he's going to bail out of that. He's going to keep going. And as soon as you see him bail out and stop trying to get in there, you need to come back up. Because if we just head down into the spot and sail into it, then we've just eaten up all our leeward hole, right? So we want to make that turn. We'll start from about a minute before we left off, and hopefully we'll get those last 7 or 8 people hopping back in. All right, so was I still talking about port tacking or about somebody coming in from behind to leeward on the line? I see microphone moving from Audrey, but didn't hear noise. Anyway, so we'll just run through both real quick, right? So if we're defending against the port tacker trying to come in here and take our spot, we're heading down. We're showing that we're about to roll in here, and so he's port, we're starboard, which means we have rights. And if he tries to get in there, he'll also be tacking, which means he also won't have rights. So he's going to bail out of there. We want to make sure that we head back up, right, so that we don't actually take this spot because we want to keep that spot open. That was the whole point of defending it. So we're going to head down real quick so that he sees he can't do it, but then we also don't want to eat it. We're going to head right back up as soon as we can. Then if we are trying to defend against somebody coming from, he's on starboard, he's trying to come into leeward and take that gap, right? If we let him get this overlap, now he is the leeward boat, and so we can't head down into him because he's leeward, he's got the right of way. So what we have to do is be watching, and we see before he gets to us, before he can create that overlap, that's when we're going to head down and show that we're taking the spot. And that way he knows even if he gets in there, sure, he's got right of way and he can head you up into the wind, but then he's got no room to do anything else, right? So we're going to show that we're shutting the door here. And so he's going to continue looking for a different hole. And then same thing again, as soon as we see him go by, as soon as he's in a position where he couldn't hop right back up here real quick, we want to head our own boat back up so that we can keep that leeward hole.
It also helps if you're very active with your voice and explaining to them very nicely that if they go in there, they will not have a good start.
Sure, I like the very nicely part, aka we're not saying, hey man, I don't think it would be really great if you went in there. Not that kind of nice, but we're not we're not bulging veins and red in the face, because that doesn't help anybody, especially not us. But certainly, make yourself heard. Hey, don't go in there, that sort of thing. And that way, even if he wasn't really paying attention, he just kind of sees out of the corner of his eye, oh, there's a hole, I'll hop into it. But then, oh, somebody's yelling at me. Whoop, okay, yeah, this is not the best place to be. So, and that kind of goes with, any situation is having something verbal going on often will help. If somebody wasn't paying attention, we're about to foul you because they didn't see you, give a yell. And that way you're helping both of you, because if you get fouled, that slows you down, even though the other guy does have to do circles. So in any sort of situation there. Anyway, where were we? So the port tack approach, yes, that is it's something we can do, but we got to be careful because it does sometimes cut our options if there's no holes open to tack into. The last kind of really weird one would be if a port tack start. So most of the time, there's going to be like one main situation that we see the port tack start happening, and that's when we have the pin end of the start line really favored, right? So everybody is sitting on starboard tack, just like usual, but we realize if we are at this port, this leeward end, the pin end of the line, we're able, if we're starting on port, to actually sail over top of everybody because it's so favored, it's so far upwind. So it's obviously a bit of a dangerous one, because once you've committed to it, you're kind of committed. The way to set up for this is to be over here on the left side of the line, and we're going to be coming toward the pin, and then ideally we're just rounding. It's like this was a leeward mark. We're doing our wide and tight roundings. We're coming nice and close, and then sailing upwind. So if you have misjudged it and you realize too late that these boats actually are charging down and they're going to get to the pin, then you kind of have no options, because not only can you not continue here because your port, they're starboard, but also you can't even do the port tack approach and tack in because you're already like off the line. So there's a definite risk to it, but in the situations where it's going to work, it can be really powerful if we can judge it the right way. So that's It can happen. It's basically that one specific situation that you'll see it. One thing that can help you is if there is a bit more current coming down the course, kind of like that dip start we talked about. We can almost think of it as a dip start, except we happen to be on port, right? So the current is going to be hurting all these guys because it's trying to push them down. So they're going to be moving this direction a little more slowly than usual, but we're able to kind of reach in. So we have more speed than all these guys that are trying to go close haul and have just accelerated from a stop. We're able to come in with full speed and cruise right around. And so the current doesn't really affect us because we're starting from above the line anyway. So we're sliding down a little bit, but it's not pushing us down here. It's just pushing us to where we want to be. So that can help you. That can make it more viable if there is current. But if there isn't current, it doesn't mean it's not going to work. It just means you got to be a lot more careful. Cool. So those are some of the like stranger things you might see that have the potential to be really powerful, but we do have to be careful because there can be some significant drawbacks to them. That's why most of the time we see everybody just kind of playing the safe game of stacking up on starboard tack in a line, and the big change you're doing is just figuring out where you want to be on that line. So if we are, another little random tip we'll throw in is that when we're kind of doing our pre-start maneuvering, we're going around the start line, waiting till it's time to start stacking up there. If we are dealing with light wind and some amount of current, we want to decide whether to tack or to jibe based on which way is the current going. So if we are in this situation where the wind is coming down the course and the current is also pushing boats down, we probably want to avoid jibing, right? Because if we're sailing here, right below the line, and then we go to turn around so we jibe, we're moving away from the wind. So we've gone however far away from the wind, but also the whole time the current's pushing us away from the wind. So we're going to end up really low, and it might be hard for us to get back to that line. In the opposite idea, if the current is going up the wind, and it's light wind coming down, then we probably want to avoid tacking, because if we go and tack here, we're going to realize that when I did my tack, it took me a little bit into the wind, but I'm probably able to just kind of spin here, but the current's pushing me up. So I end up here, higher than I want to be, right? Which being too high above the line, or even being too high towards the line, is just as much of a problem as being too low, right? Being late to leeward is potentially not even as much of a problem as being late to windward, because now how do we get to the line? We've got all these boats coming up to us, right? So either way, kind of take your turn in the direction away from the current. So if current's going upwind, we probably want to jibe to stay in the same area. If current's going downwind, try doing a tack to stay in the same area. And obviously, the more wind we get, the less the current is going to matter. The variation in current you'll see is usually between like 0 and 1 knot. If you have like a 2 or 3 knot current, that's a lot of current. That's crazy. And obviously the variation in wind we might see probably goes from 0 to 20 knots before we would not hold a regatta. So there's obviously going to be a lot more variation in wind. The more wind you have, the less effect the current's going to have. So especially in the light air, just make sure that we're really taking that current into account, because it will have a big effect on us. All right, so now kind of looking at how do we choose whether to start near the weather end or the leeward end or the middle, or maybe not so much how do we choose, but when we've decided to start there, if we're going for this normal lining up on starboard start, if we've decided to go for the weather end, the boat end, what's our best things we can do to make sure this happens, right? So if we are not really sure of any particular thing that's going on, we're not sure that there's a wind shift that would make us want to start near the pin end, near the leeward end. If we don't really have any information to tell us any other way, the weather end, the boat end, is usually a pretty good bet to start near, because there's for a couple of reasons, right? One would be it's a bit more forgiving. We were talking before, if you're going to be late, be at the boat end, because that gives you kind of that escape route. If you need, you can get out toward the right side. So it's a little more forgiving in that way. It's easier if you start behind to get out of dirty air rather than being stuck. If you start near the pin and you're in the second row, then you either have to keep going underneath everybody who's here, or you can tack and you have to go across the entire course before you're out from underneath this whole line of boats. But with that boat end, you can just get right away, and maybe there's one or two boats that have gone with you, but certainly you're not sailing under the entire fleet. The other thing with that would be it's a lot easier to tell where you are on the line, right? And not only that, but if you happen to be over, you will very likely know it, because the person who's calling out that you're over is right next to you, instead of being 200 feet away if you happen to start down here, right? So if you don't have a particular reason to go anywhere else, you may as well try to start near the boat. So yeah, as you're coming in here, you're thinking about where the ley line is to the mark or to the boat, right? So our close hauled line that we would be sailing on, if we are above that, that's fine. If we're aiming to kind of sit there and then move and get right in underneath here, but just be aware that if we're above that ley line, we could have somebody come in and be able to just completely hold us out, and we kind of have to, spin around in a circle and come back later. So a better idea is perhaps that we're trying to set up underneath this ley line. That way we can be the one that's shutting out the people that are sitting here. And if we have, if we're kind of sitting there with a minute or 30 seconds to go, or whatever the case might be, maybe nobody's sailing close hauled right now, so we can kind of get away with that, because we know that since boats do slowly slide downwind, if we fast forward a minute, everybody's down here. And so in that case, yeah, we are above that ley line, but by the time it matters, we'll be below it. So we want to make sure that we're kind of timing that drift and figuring out where we're going to end up. It probably doesn't make sense, to try to drift from over here. We want to sail to a spot near the boat, and then we can kind of work our way in there. But it is going to be a bit more dangerous to assume that we can get in by just sailing right in here, because somebody who is sitting is going to be able to block us out. If you happen to end up in a situation where you are coming in a bit later, right? We see that there's going to be somebody here pretty much all the time. Ideally, if we're going for the boat end, this green boat is us. But if it's not, there's going to be somebody there. It's not just going to be open, right? So if we happen to be coming in, we need to decide, can I go over this guy, or do I need to go under him? So over meaning not drive over top of him, because he's going to block that, but can I start in line with him, right? Can I be to windward so that as he goes, I go with him? Or is he sitting still enough, and do I have enough speed and enough time that I can go underneath him and come in and hop into his leeward hole there, right? So that kind of comes back to one of the rules that we talked about earlier, right? Don't go underneath unless we're sure we can come out the other side and get into that clean air. So if it's 3 seconds until the start and this guy is already starting to head down to get his acceleration, then that's not when we want to go to leeward. That's the time when we say, oh hey, he's heading down to accelerate, which means suddenly here's a spot. So I'm gonna aim up here, and I'll either get in here with him, or at least I'll be right behind him, and then that gives me the option to tack out if I need to, right? But normally we're the ones that want to be starting there. So we're sitting and we're slowly sidling down, and then we're starting right here. So that's kind of keep that ley line in mind. If you're above it, It's okay if you've got time to drift down, but if you're at the end, you want to be careful because that's going to leave it very easy for people at the boat to shut you out. All right, so that's our boat end of the line. And if we are moving down to the other end, maybe we have a reason that we want to start at the pin end, right? So if we, remember we said, don't try to win the pin, don't try to be the first boat at the pin unless we're 100% sure we can do it, right? If it's not super crowded and we have a reason we want to be there, we just got a couple boats sitting around, then sure, that's fine. We can sit here, and then as soon as it's time to go down and accelerate, we can even leave ourselves some room and get out there. But if it's going to be crowded, if we see that, maybe we're coming to the pin because it's really favored and everybody wants to be there. If there's going to be a big crowd, then we may as well let them pile themselves up into a pack, and a whole bunch of them are going to lose, and we'll start a little farther away, right? So we'll be maybe a few more boat lengths down, and we'll let them get all in their pack, and probably some of them are going to foul up on the mark. Some of them are going to get away and get a good start, but again, packs are slow, and so even the ones that do manage to accelerate are not going to do the best. And so if we're just a boat length down from them, then we can kind of smoothly go, and we've got the benefit of being near the pin end without getting all tangled up in the mess. So basically, if the more boats there are trying to get to the pin, the further we'd want to stay actually from that buoy. It's going to be a lot better to have a good start close to where we want to be than to end up with a bad start in the perfect position, if that makes sense. It's kind of like, remember we were talking yesterday about those percentage sort of things, like we're gambling the whole time. Nothing is totally certain, so we're going for the best odds that we can, right? There's a very good payoff if we do this right, but it's a very bad deal if we do it wrong. It's also a very high chance that we'll do it wrong. So you're kind of playing those percentages.
Speaking
Again,
of percentages,
what's that?
You remember the guy that's found out, statistically speaking, that winning the pin gave you the highest chance of winning the race. So if you pick an end and you can win it, the pin end is the end to pick. It's a lot riskier, but with the higher risk comes the higher reward.
True. And then we bring in that consistency is key part to the high school races. We have no drop races. If you get a bad race, it always counts. So that's kind of your tricks for what you need to do to get to the pin, right? And then if we are in the middle of the line, so we don't have we've kind of ended up in the middle, and maybe this is, we didn't have any particular plan, didn't have any information either way. So we just kind of, hopped into our line, found a good hole, and we just happened to be where we are. So the big thing that we want to watch for if we're near the middle of the line is what we call midline sag. And so basically that's happening. Remember, the start line is an imaginary line through the water. It's not painted on the water. Even though they broadcast it that way in the the America's Cup stuff. That's obviously all digital. It's not physically there on the water. So everybody has to figure out for themselves where that line is. And it turns out that if you're near the boat, it's easy because here's the boat. There's the end point of the line that I can use to help me figure out where I am. Same thing with the pin. Here's the pin, the end of the line. I can use that to help me figure out where I am. If you're in here, you might not be able really to see either end. And so you're kind of lining yourself up with the boat near you, right? So if here's one end of our line, here's the bow of our boat. Those are the only vantage points I have if I'm the green boat looking back here. So I'm going to sit and look back, and I'm going to kind of line myself up there. But that means I'm actually a little lower than this guy, right? Unless he is like ragifying right on the line, he's going to be a little low. And so I'm going to be a little lower than he is because I'm drawing my line like that. So I'm going to end up there. The next boat is going to be doing that with me. And so he's going to end up here. And so if we look at that, as we get toward the center of the line, everybody is dipping lower and lower. And then coming out the opposite end, the same deal happens. The person at the pin is going to be a little bit lower than the line, and the person next to him is going to be a little bit lower than him. So we end up with this sag right in the middle. Sometimes this gets really crazy amounts of sag. It might be, and I've seen it at like a boat length. And you know, people around this guy are this one boat has pulled out in front because he realizes where the line is. See if I can like draw up what was happening. You know, there's over the course of a super long line, one boat is above everyone, and everybody around him that is lining themselves up with their neighbor is going ballistic. And they're like, dude, you're super obviously over. Just bail out right now. He's like, no, I'm good. They're like, how's this guy not over? It's because there was so much sag that he was able to be just completely over top of everyone and get the best start in the whole fleet because he realized where the buoys were. So we want to realize that that's basically going to happen in any race start. The middle is going to be a little lower, and we're going to try to kind of edge out a little bit and actually see where those buoys are. Because if we can get a little further forward in front of the boats around us, sometimes it's a little like psychological barrier. It's like, if I do push out, what if I end up over? I'm going to have no way to back myself up. But we kind of know in our heads, if I'm in the middle, everybody around me is low. So I'm going to edge out a little bit so I can get a view of where these buoys are, and then I can actually see. And now by doing that, I've kind of worked myself out, and I'm able to start a little bit ahead of them, which is only going to help me. Right? So kind of keep that in mind. It's probably there. So kind of a way you could test it is like, you know, if you're in line with all these other boats and you look around and you can't see the pin there, or if you look around and you can't see the boat, then you are in part of the sag. If you can pull yourself out a little bit so that you can see the pin or you can see the boat, then you know you're starting to pull yourself up to a better spot. So if you can't see either one, you're in the sag and pull yourself up so you can get there. All right, so last couple of things would be as far as being on the line. If we are looking at a pack of boats, you know, we're going along, we're trying to find our spot, and there is a pack of boats sitting on the line. Maybe they've just been a little careless, or maybe somebody popped in the middle of them that shouldn't have, but we've got these people all real close up together, right? And maybe they're doing fine right now. Maybe they're not really stuck. It's just that nobody's going to have a lot of room to accelerate. We obviously don't want to be here, but what usually happens is there's going to be some space either just to windward of them or just to leeward of them. So if they are all moving down the line a bit, right? If they're real close, but they're not. It's not like they've fouled up in each other. They're still ready for the start. They're just all messed up. They're all close up to each other. If they are still moving downwind, then we'll just hop into this little spot that's magically appearing right up to weather of them toward the boat end of the line, and that usually kind of stays open. So if we're able, that's a spot we can take. If we're looking at our pack and it's like something bad has happened. They're all head to wind. They're not moving. That whole pack is going to be not moving at the start. That means they're not drifting down to leeward, right? If they're not under control, then they're not going to be moving. They're all stuck up together. So a little hole to leeward is going to appear. So we can, if we're either coming from this side or coming from the port side, we can hop right into this hole to leeward, and they're not moving. So when we do our acceleration, are able to just shoot right out in front of them. The nice thing about trying to look for something like this happening is that whether we get the hole on the leeward side or on the windward side, we know we've got a nice clear area to one side of us. So if we take the leeward hole, then we know that there's this nice big open space to windward of us. We know we're not going to have anybody on our wind. And if we need to tack out for whatever reason, if we are in a position where we know we want to get toward the right side, we know we've got that ability right after the start to tack right over into this open space that 3 or 4 boats would normally have been filling. At this, same other side of the coin, I guess, is that if we see them moving to leeward, so we take the spot to windward of them, we know that they're not going to get that acceleration. They'll start moving, but they're going to be a lot slower than everybody else on the line, which means we have this nice space to leeward. We know that we're not in danger of this kind of deal, of starting, not getting our acceleration the way we wanted it. So we kind of end up sliding into the boat that's to leeward of us. We know that's not going to happen because we've got all that empty leeward space below us. So if you find a pack, there's usually going to be some way that you can utilize it and get a spot out of it. Cool. All right, I think I've said last thing like 3 times, but this is actually the last thing here. So this is after we've started, right? This is all this stuff before now has been, how do we get a good start? Now we have started, and in this situation, we did not get a good start. We are a second row somewhere. So how do we fix it, right? So the first off would be, as soon as you realize you're in a bad spot, get out of there as soon as you can. And this would apply to anywhere, whether you're right after the start, whether you're in the starting sequence, whether you're somewhere else in the race course. If we're in a bad spot, let's take some action to get out, because pretty much almost every possibility that you could do is going to be better than continuing in something that's not working. Right. So if we are stuck right here on the start line, sitting there is only going to make it worse because it's going to give us less time to fix things. So once we realize we're in a bad spot, let's take some action to fix it. And just because we've started in the second row, it doesn't mean that the only way we can fix it is by just cranking out to a corner. If everybody's going out to the left side and we've started in the second row, it doesn't mean the only way to fix it is go way out to the right side. Because often, if everybody's going left, maybe there's a reason. Maybe that's where the wind is, and so if we go right, we are just in less wind and we're not going to catch up anyway. So don't just automatically go way out to the other side just because you're in the back. That's not. It's again one of those low percentage. Like it could work, but there's a very slight chance. So instead of that, we are going to find what's the favored side of the course. And we're going to find clean air, right? So get to the favorite side of the course in a clean lane, and that's going to be the best chance of pulling back into the race. And it might mean that we are continuing with every boat for now, just because we're in the middle of kind of the whole fleet doesn't mean that there's no way that we can catch up to them. It instead might mean we're giving ourselves the best chance of catching up, right? So we're find where we would want to go in the course anyway. We're going to get a clean lane so that we can sail fast. If we are, if we started over toward the left and we're moving to the right, just, everybody is going back and forth as they go upwind. If we're coming along and we're on port and we see a starboard tacker, we have 2 options. We can either leave out him or we can duck. In this situation, when we're already kind of back in the second row, we're trying to pull ourselves back up. The best thing to do here is going to be to duck the starboard tack boat instead of leave outing him. If we leave out right here like that, we come in and tack right here. All we've done really is kind of push ourselves further out to the left. We're forcing ourselves further to the side, and we're kind of cutting down our options later because now we can't really tack, right? This guy is still here, and maybe we force him to tack, but there's also a chance that he stays there. So if we do this, now we can only continue left until he decides to tack. And I don't know about you, but I don't like having my decisions, they have to be based on what somebody else decides to do. So instead, we're going to duck him, keep going, and that way now we're in. We know that we're not going to mess it up and be in his bad air if we do the leave out wrong. We know we're getting toward a clean lane. And then also we still have all our options open. We can still tack back if we want to, but we can also continue to the right. So duck instead of lee bowing when we're way down here. And then also, if we do this in particular, we can try to set up what we'll call a starter tack blocker, right? So if we are, if we just duck this guy, we're gonna go a couple boat lengths and then tack back. Imagine we're doing, think of it like when we do our rabbit starts. You go a couple boat lengths to make sure you're getting clean air, and then you tack back. And what this has done for us is that anybody else who is coming across on port tack could have been a problem for us, right? They might have ended up lee bowing us later on, but they're going to do one of two things as they come up to this guy. They're going to either lee bow him, in which case they're never going to bother us, right? Or they're going to duck him, in which case they're now going to have to duck you too. And so by setting up so that we're going where we want to go with kind of this blocker here, this blocker boat, we've got rid of any potential problem we might have with port tack boats coming along. So like if this guy wasn't here, maybe he would have been able to cross us completely or lee bow us so effectively that we kind of lose our lane. But since he's here, this guy either lee bows the blue boat or he ducks underneath, and because he had to duck, now he's lower and he probably has to duck us as well. So that can help us out. So a couple different things that we can do to kind of help ourselves pull back into the race after we've had a bad start, whether we got rolled over or we're just second row. But yeah, the big thing to think of there is don't just do the opposite of what everybody else is doing because that's clean air. Figure out what you would want to do anyway. Still go to that favorite side of the course, and then find those clean lanes, and just think about those couple little tactical things that may make a bigger difference than you think. All right, so another bit of a long one, but do we have any last comments or questions before we end for today? Looks like we got almost everybody back in there. Dan looks like he's trying to talk. What's up? Or at least his character's coming up.
I mean, I can talk if you'd like me to, but I was not trying to talk.
Okay. Your little your profile just came up, the Falcon. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, that was another bit of a long one. I'll get the recording put up. A note should already be on the website. And for anybody who's interested in sticking around to see the pyramid of greatness of what you need to focus on when figuring out how to sail your boat fast, all you green fleeters, tune in about 15 minutes at 4:30. Other than that, I will see you all tomorrow.
Peace.